Folks, welcome to topic 7 of Unit 2 of the National 5 Biology course. So we're finishing up, rounding off Unit 2 by looking at absorption of materials. Now, absorption of materials is a topic which is quite short, but it has a lot of important information in it, and it does get asked about a lot in the exam. So it's important that while there's not a lot here, you do learn all of this topic. So we'll kick off with talking about the materials that are absorbed in these processes. So we'll talk about oxygen and nutrients first. Now, we know that we get oxygen from our lungs. We breathe it in via our lungs and then it moves into our bloodstream. And we know that we get our nutrients from our food that we consume. And that's where it gets digested and broken down in our small intestine and then absorbed into our blood. Okay, so the nutrients from the food must be absorbed into the bloodstream to be delivered to our cells for respiration. Okay, we know aerobic respiration requires oxygen to be present, and respiration itself requires glucose. And we get that. That's one of the nutrients that we get from the food that we digest and absorb into our bloodstream. Now, we also produce waste materials in our cells, and those waste materials have to exit our body. Things like carbon dioxide, for example, have to be removed from the cells, then they enter the bloodstream and they're taken away to the lungs where they can then exit. Okay, so that carbon dioxide gets taken in the bloodstream from here over to here where the lungs are. Okay. Whereas the oxygen, the glucose, amino acids, they are coming along the bloodstream and then they diffuse from the bloodstream, from the capillaries into the adjacent cells there. So tissues contain capillary networks and that allows an exchange of materials to happen at a cellular level. Okay, so that's quite a loaded sentence there. Tissues contain capillary networks. Now we know that from actually the last topic, don't we, that the capillaries form these networks around tissues and organs. And those networks, interconnected strands there, those blood vessels, they allow the exchange of materials at a cellular level. Okay, that basically means into and out of cells. Now, in order to do that, we need surfaces. Okay, we need surfaces to be involved. And we talk a lot in biology about a particular organ or a tissue or whatever having, or a cell having a large surface area. Okay, and the reason why large surface area is so important is because these surfaces that are involved in the absorption of materials, they have certain features in common. Okay, they have certain features in common. So whether we're looking at the root hair cell in plants, or we're looking at the alveoli in human lungs, or we're looking at the capillaries that lace themselves around our tissues and organs, they all have these key features in common. And I would say if there's one thing you learn from this topic and you take away, this is the thing to learn. They have large surface area. We've spoken about this before. They have thin walls. We spoke about thin walls in the last topic when we looked at the blood vessels and the capillaries. And they have an extensive blood supply. And this is why this topic fits nicely into this part of the course, because we've just learned about how the capillaries have thin walls, how they give themselves a large surface area by having all of these different vessels that split up into all these different channels, and they form networks around our tissues and our organs. And they provide an extensive blood supply because by having all these little channels going through our tissues, we can supply more blood, we can increase the surface area and therefore increase the efficiency of absorption. Okay, and that's what these features do. They increase the efficiency of absorption. Now, in your exam, the most common thing that you're asked about is how does X tissue increase the efficiency of absorption? And your answers are pretty much always the same. Large surface area, thin walls, extensive blood supply. When we do the past paper questions later on, we'll see how commonly this comes up, and you'll see it yourself as you work through your exam practice questions. So those nutrients from our food are absorbed into our bloodstream. Now, how do they get from our intestines into our bloodstream? Well, they go through this little structure here called a villi, okay, or a villus for singular. So the villi, and you can see just how many of them there are there on the wall of the small intestine. Now, the villi are many numbered, okay? There is a large number of these villi. Now, why is there so many of them? It's for the same reasons we talked about before. A large number of these villi provides a large surface area. And we know that's one of the three key features that will improve the efficiency of absorption. Okay, so that large number of villi is important. They're also thin walled. Okay, so each villus is thin walled. And if we have a look at this lower diagram here, we can see that the walls of the villus are very thin. Okay, you can see all these little finger like projections coming out from the wall of the small intestine, okay, around each of these villus here. Now, each villus contains a capillary network. Now, that capillary network, okay, we can see it in red here, that capillary network absorbs glucose and amino acids, okay? Glucose for aerobic respiration, amino acids for protein synthesis. And they also contain a structure called a lacteal, okay? And we can see that here as well, just lacing its way through the center of the villus there. And the lacteal absorbs fatty acids and glycerol. Okay. So again, in the exam, if you're asked about the villus, the villi, it might say something like, how does it increase the efficiency of absorption? You would say it has a large number, which increases the surface area. It is thin walled, which makes it easier or faster for the molecules to diffuse through. You could say that they have a good blood supply. Okay, they've got this network of capillaries within each of the villus, and that they have a lacteal to absorb the fatty acids and glycerol. Okay, so there's a number of different things that you can say about the villi that make them increase the efficiency of the absorption within the small intestine. Now, lungs are one of the most important organs in our body because they are the site of gas exchange. Okay, they are the organ that exchanges gases into and out of our body. Now, they consist of a large number. Okay, note the large number again. Okay, large surface area of alveoli, these are called, okay? You can see those little alveoli here in the diagram on the right, the zoomed in one here. You can see lots of these little air sacs here. They're called alveoli, and they're found at the very bottom of your lungs, okay? Once the air has travelled as far as it can go, it will find itself in these little alveoli. And what the large number of alveoli provides, as I said before, is a large surface area. Okay, so as soon as you think large number, you think large surface area. Now, oxygen and carbon dioxide are the two gases that are absorbed through the walls of the alveoli. And we'll notice that it also uses the word thin to describe the alveolar walls. Okay, thin walls again. Notice how that keeps coming up. Also, the large surface area, the thin walls. And can you guess what the next feature is? That's right, an extensive blood supply. So many blood capillaries. And that's why I said if you can just remember those three key features, you're going to be fine for this topic because it always talks about the same things: large surface area, thin walls, extensive blood supply. Okay. Okay, folks. So moving on to the past paper section of the topic, we'll have a look at some of the past paper questions and apply what we've just learned to the context of the SQA exam. So this first question here, it says the diagram below shows part of the human respiratory system. Which letter identifies the alveoli? Now, we described the alveoli as being like small circular sacs that are found at the very end of our respiratory pathway. So it looks as though it's going to be these ones down here, and that's going to be D. Okay. For this kind of question, you just have to have learned where the alveoli are and what they look like. Okay. It's not going to be A there. We've got our trachea, we've got our bronchi there for B, we've got our bronchioles for C. You don't need to know these names. But D is the one that's the alveoli. Okay, next one here, we've got the concentration, that's fine. Okay, so alveolus, associated blood vessel, that's fine. We've got the concentrations of the gases there. Okay, so as blood flows from X to Y, from here to here, the gases are exchanged with the alveolus. Which line in the table identifies the concentrations of gases at X and at Y? Okay, now we know from earlier in the course that, for example, with diffusion, molecules move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. Okay, so we've got a high concentration of oxygen in the alveolus here. That's going to move to the blood here, and we've got a lower carbon dioxide concentration there, which means we must have a higher one in the blood. So it's going to move out of the blood and into the alveolus here. Now, if we know that we have a high carbon dioxide concentration here, and we therefore must have a low oxygen concentration here, At point X, our carbon dioxide, that's before the exchange here. So carbon dioxide is going to be high and our oxygen is going to be low. Okay. So at X, we're going to have low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. At Y, this is after the oxygen has a chance to diffuse out the alveolus into the blood. The oxygen levels are going to be high and the carbon dioxide levels are going to be lower because it will have left the blood by the time it gets to Y. Okay, so we're looking at that one there. Low oxygen at X, low CO2 at Y. Okay, question 14. The diagram below shows an alveolus with part of its blood capillary network. At which position would blood with the highest concentration of oxygen been found? Okay, so where's the most oxygen? Well, this one ties in nicely with our previous question, and you can see just how similar questions are. And that's going to be after the alveolus, right? Because we're going to have a high oxygen concentration here and a low one here. So it's going to move from here down into here. So when's it going to be highest? When it's had a chance to diffuse into the blood completely, which is going to be at point D there. Okay. Okay, number 15 here. The function of the villi in the small intestine is to increase the surface area for. Why do we want to increase the surface area in the villi? It's so that we can absorb more of our glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, and glycerols. Okay, our nutrients. Okay, next question. You can see this is very familiar based on the one we did earlier. Which label identifies the alveoli? It's going to be again down here at D. That's the alveoli. The diagram shows some structures in a villus. Which line in the table below correctly identifies the products of digestion which pass into structures X and Y? So X and Y, we need to be able to identify them. So let's look at Y first of all. That's probably easier to identify. Y is going to be our capillary. Y is the capillary. And X is going to be our lacteal. Okay. Now you need to be able to identify both of them in a diagram and know roughly what they look like. Okay, and we can see that in this diagram here. Now the capillary, okay, the capillary network is where we absorb amino acids and glucose. Okay, so for Y, we're looking for amino acids and we're looking for glucose. Okay. The lacteal absorbs fatty acids and glycerol. So glycerol, fatty acids. Okay. But there's only one correct option that has both of those columns ticked, and that's going to be D. Okay. Which of the following statements is true of the villi? So the blood capillaries absorb glycerol and amino acids. Well, it does absorb amino acids, but it doesn't absorb glycerol. Blood capillaries absorb glucose? Yep, it does. And fatty acids? Nope. The lacteals absorb glycerol and fatty acids? True and true. The lacteals absorb glucose? Nope. And amino acids? Nope. So the only one with two ticks there is going to be C. Okay, so that'll be your answer. So you do need to know the substances that the lacteal and the capillaries absorb. If you do, you can see just how many marks are on offer with the number of questions like this. Okay, next question. Diagram shows a villus from the small intestine. Which of the following products of digestion are both absorbed into the lacteal? Again, another mark for that same bit of knowledge. We know it's the glycerol and the fatty acids. Glycerol and fatty acids. So that's going to be A. Okay. This question here, the following diagram shows a cross section of some villi in the small intestine. Okay, that's fine. Explain why the structure and the number of villi make absorption an efficient process in the small intestine. Now, we talked about this earlier on, and we talked about the points that you have to make whenever you get asked this. Okay, and there are three generic points that you should always make. They are thin walls, they are large surface area, and they are extensive blood supply. Okay, they are the generic ones that you should say. If we can just remember those, we're in a good place. But let's apply it specifically to the this particular question. So the structure and the number of villi. Let's talk about number first because that's probably the easiest. There is a large number of villi, which gives it a larger surface area. Okay, point one. Also, the shape of the villi give it a larger surface area. Okay, having that finger-like projection in that shape allows it to have a larger surface area. Thin walls, okay? We can see that the walls there are extremely thin. They are one cell thick on this diagram. You can see that, just one cell thick on each of the villi. Okay, so we've got extremely thin walls. And the extensive blood supply, well, that comes in the form of this network of capillaries that we have inside of it. So those are the kind of main points that they're looking for you guys to make when it comes to a question like this. Remember your three key touchstone words. That's thin walls, large surface area, extensive blood supply, and then just expand on those a little bit and give some details of how the villi has structure and number to improve all of those aspects, all of those features. Okay, the diagrams below represent part of the human breathing system. Name the structure labeled W. Okay, now, W, hopefully by now, we recognize that as being our alveoli. Okay. Describe two features of these structures which improve the efficiency of gas exchange. And again, we've had this question again. So this bit of knowledge is going to be so key for us. Thin walls, you can say large surface area, and for the second point there, we could say an extensive blood supply. Okay. Same three features that we're using for all these answers. It's incredible how far just that little bit of knowledge will get you. So do remember that. Okay, and this last question then to finish off with. It says nutrients from food are absorbed into the villi that are found in the small intestine. The diagram represents a single villus, okay? So we've got our villus there. Now, what it asks is this. Name one type of molecule absorbed by each of the labelled structures. So let's do that just now, okay? Let's look at A first of all. Now, A is this central structure, okay? And that central structure in the small intestine is known as the lacteal. And the lacteal absorbs fatty acids and glycerol, okay? B is pointing to our network of capillaries, okay? And capillaries, we know, absorb our glucose and amino acids, okay? So you could put either one of them. You don't actually have to put all four of them. You could put one for A and one for B there, but we're just putting in all four because why not test ourselves when we know the knowledge? Why not give it if we're sure that it's right? Okay. Part B, explain why having a large number of villus improves the efficiency of absorption in the small intestine. And you can see we're just getting these questions over and over again, aren't we? The large number of villi increases the surface area. Okay, it increases the surface area. And again, because it's an explain question, you could probably go into that in a little bit more detail and say something like increases the surface area as there's so many villi and there's more area for the glucose molecules to be absorbed or the amino acid molecules to be absorbed or something that increases the surface area is enough to get you the mark there. Okay, so identify the structural feature of a single villus, which is also found in an alveolus, which increases the efficiency of absorption. Okay, so we've already mentioned surface area, so we're not going to mention that here. We could, however, say something like thin walls, okay? Or we could say extensive blood supply, okay? Apologies, I'm using my mouse for this last one here. Extensive blood supply, okay? So the thin walls or extensive blood supply would be a structural feature, which is also found in alveolus that would increase the efficiency of absorption. Okay, so something along those lines would help you out and get you the mark. Right, folks, hope that was useful. As always, leave any questions or queries or things you're not sure about in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one. Class dismissed.